Hey, I'm Derek, it's me, Derek, and this is Stop Skeletons and Fighting. It's Halloween, Spooktober Oween's Eve of the Witch, and if you've been a long-time viewer of this channel, you know we always do Halloween videos, and in fact, you might remember some Halloween videos I made years ago for the quote-unquote D trilogy. These are three fascinating, flawed horror masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. And hey, shameless plug, if you're watching this today on Wednesday, October 9th, we are celebrating October by streaming the first D on twitch.tv/Stop Skeletons and Fighting at 6 p.m. PT for the first ever Punching Weight Wednesdays. But that's on Twitch. On this channel on YouTube, we're gonna be honoring the man who helped bring these games to the world, Kenji Eno. A man whose name you probably don't know, even if you are a hardcore horror fan, but you should know. Because the development of these three games is absolutely legendary. You heard about the time that Eno managed to get D a T for teen rating by sneaking in a violent cannibal storyline after deadline. What about the time he exploded a bridge with Sony at their own expo? Or when he cornered acclaimed composer Michael Nyman in a hotel room for 6 hours until he finally agreed to write the music for Enemy Zero. These are just a few of the legends surrounding Kenji Eno. And he did all this as an independent developer, way back before indie development was viable like it is today. It's still not very viable, but you know what I'm trying to say. But once you start to look at the rest of Eno's career, outside of these anecdotes, a different, more nuanced picture emerges. The full picture of the man is distorted by time, language, madness, and his own death in 2013 at the age of only 42. Kenji Eno was a creator who followed his convictions to their fullest extent, even if he didn't fully understand where his convictions were coming from. Conventions be damned, and he wanted you to notice. Welcome to Past Mortem, where we break down and explore the stories of video games. In this episode, we're going to delve into the story of a Japanese game legend and one of the greatest horror game makers of all time, Kenji Eno. Kenji Eno was born May 5th, 1970 in Arakawa, Tokyo, Japan. He liked computers from a young age, but his first love was music. He got his start in programming when his dad bought him a computer instead of a piano. Even from an early age, he never let petty obstacles overcome him. Eno took his new computer and learned how to make his own synthesizer. Hell yeah, so now he knew how to make music and program. I'm not just telling you this because many of the games he would go on to make feature music written and performed by him. This was also how he was able to win money for a game he designed as a kid. Right from the get-go, he was poised to draw his own path. Eno wasn't even into games as a kid. Well, okay, he was into games, most kids are, but he wasn't into games in the sense that he knew he wanted to make them as an adult. After dropping out of high school at 17, his entry into the games industry was, according to him, accidental. It was his third attempt at getting a job, and he picked a programming job at a small developer named Interlink. He didn't even know how to program anymore, but he showed off the game he won the contest with in the interview. It wasn't until later that he was found out and almost fired, but he still knew how to make music, so he was transferred over from programming to the sound division. This guy just never gives up. This was his first industry job, but he didn't last for very long, and his output from Interlink wasn't very significant or representative of what Eno would eventually become. He did sound work and composing for a few games like the Famicom port of Altered Beast, and planning for 2 different Gundam games. After a year of this, Eno decided to hunker down and work his way up through the ranks of Interlink. No, I'm just kidding. He dumped Interlink and created his own independent game company in 1989, Entertainment Imagination Magnificence, or EIM. When he was just 19. What were you doing when you were 19? I was hosting a college radio show. This dude had his own game company. Okay, let's take a second and pause here. The year is 1989. Game development in Japan, even to this day, has typically been concentrated in the hands of a few big players. Basically, Eno went indie before anyone knew that was a viable option. Japanese indies still struggle in Japan. For example, Japanese indie developers didn't even have their own space at Tokyo Game Show until 2013. And digressions aside, we can only speculate how in the world a 19-year-old convinced multiple people to work for his independent game company the year that the Game Boy came out. In any case, Eno started EIM because he wanted to create original games. Most of these games, like Casino Kid 2, are essentially write-offs, which I know sounds mean, but they're fine games. Probably the most famous of Eno's games from this period is Panic Restaurant, which is one of my personal favorites, and one of the few of his games to see release in North America. And who doesn't love an action platformer about a chef battling evil food monsters? Yeah, not today, chicken legs. Tonight, you're on the menu. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Another one that stands out is 1991's Japan-only Time Zone. It features a baseball hat-wearing kid who needs to save his pink-haired friend from an evil Doc Brown, I guess. It's ultimately a pretty standard Famicom adventure game, but things like skateboarding and your boomerang hat are super endearing. It's way cooler than Adventure Island. Yeah, I said it. However, Eno was quickly disillusioned by the facts of Japanese development at the time. In his own words, "I was forced to put licensed characters in the titles, and that was pretty tough on me, and I got mentally unstable at a point. Towards the end, there was a period where I wouldn't even go to my office because I was so upset." This is, I think, in reference to Sunman, which you might have heard of. It was supposed to be a Superman game developed for Sunsoft. Now, I've played Sunman. Ultimately, it was never released, but you can do a lot worse for a Superman video game than Sunman. It is another example of his unwavering conviction and represents the first hints of the mental health issues that would plague Eno's professional life. Eno dissolved EIM in 1992 and left the game industry. For the next 2 years, he worked for a car magazine as a consultant. I'm not sure what that means or how the hell he got that job. What did he suddenly know about cars? But what's important was that it was this job that would eventually bring Eno to San Francisco in the 1994 Macworld Expo. The expo itself was fine, but what really struck Eno was a be-in event. An event where developers were sharing music, getting high, and excited about their publishers. It was rock and roll. According to Eno, okay, game creators can be cool. It's not just nerds out there. There are actually cool creators. Literally on the plane ride back to Japan, Eno decided to return to games, and he convinced the president of his magazine's publishing company to invest in him. Again, we're not exactly sure how, but yes, that is how in 1994 he got back into games. He took his boss's money and founded his next company, Warp. Warp is the company that would eventually produce the D trilogy games I mentioned earlier. And I kind of hate the idea of the auteur director trope, especially in video games, but Eno put some serious work into each game. Perhaps this is no more than any other indie director puts into a game, but while at Warp, Eno claims he did sketch design, sound effects, music, directing, and production for every game. Not sure how true that is, but Warp games all have a very distinct flavor. They're all a little weird. They're weird games, and that's why I love them. Warp's early games were on Panasonic's short-lived 3DO, which Eno went all in on for a few reasons. One was practical. The 3DO was one of the first major consoles that was 100% CD-based and therefore required a lot less capital to make games. For example, at the time, it cost about $10 a unit to make a Nintendo game on a cartridge before any other fees. Another was that the 3DO was the brainchild of Trip Hopkins, the founder of EA, and more importantly for us, the person who embodied to Eno the San Francisco startup culture he fell in love with at Macworld. That's my personal headcanon that they just got high and talked about the Beatles, but that's probably not what happened. Probably. Though it's what they're famous for, Warp's horror games are not indicative of the rest of their work. Most of their other games could be most generously described as minigame collections, less charitably as shovelware. Still, all of these games have a through line that is unmistakable. Even in D, once you get to the puzzle sections, you see the echoes of these other games. But let's get back on track here. Warp wasted no time publishing its first 2 games within its first year of operation. Flopon World for the 3DO actually made it over to the US as Tripped. It's literally a reference to Trip Hopkins. Maybe they did acid together. Anyway, it's a funky take on Puyo Puyo gameplay with some fun horror stuff thrown in. It's like Eno thought, you know what would make Puyo Puyo better? Scary shit. And that was that. And it's like, this is the kind of thing I love about Eno. A lot of his games have a very simple core concept, like what if I make a striptease mahjong game where girls get to beat up the perverts? Or how about a sumo wrestling game where all the characters are robots? This one's called Totsugeki Karakuri Megadasu, and it's just crazy like punching weight style game right here. Look at this, it's full 3D, it's split screen. What, in 1994? Like, the frame rate's real solid, it controls like garbage, but like, man, this is amazing. D came out the following year in 1995, and when compared to Warp's other games, it's obvious Eno was throwing everything he had into it. According to him, the whole thing was a major gamble. If D failed, then Warp would have to close. The game started out as an adventure game with story added later into development. It was given a twist ending, but Eno still thought it was too boring. That's when he added the ultimate X factor, violent murder and cannibalism, which isn't something that will get you a T for teen rating, usually. Eno knew that these additions wouldn't be approved by 3DO, so he deliberately turned in the final version of D late, so that no one would have time to double check the final build, which is crazy. I feel like that is exactly the type of thing that the ESRB would go ballistic over. I guess no one cared. I guess anybody who noticed, like, was cool. I mean, even the Warp team didn't know about the cannibalism until after the game's release, which also means he must have animated those completely by himself. This guy. Everything is riding on D's success. Hey, everything riding on that D. And he pulls a stunt like this. Man. But it worked. In Japan, D, where it's instead known as D no Shokutaku, aka D's dinner table, sold at least 1 million copies and became a cult hit abroad. It was one of the first horror games I ever played, and at the right young age of 11, it scared the crap out of me. I first played it on the PlayStation, and some of D's success and popularity today is due to the fact that it made it off of the 3DO, but quite frankly, Sony didn't treat Eno so well. Of the 100,000 copies Sony promised to publish, they only made 28,000, even though D still came out on the 3DO and Saturn. For an indie like Warp, that could have been enough to break the company, but let's put a pin in that for now. So how do you follow up a masterpiece like D? Well, if you're Eno, you do it with 1996's Short Warp, a minigame collection that most notably came packaged with a Warp-branded condom. Only 10,000 copies were produced, likely because of the inclusion of the condom. I mean, packaging a package for the package must have been expensive. Eno says that at the time he was again struggling with his mental health and needed to do something out of the ordinary to make himself feel balanced. Public service announcement here, condoms expire. I just needed to know if there are any babies out there because of Short Warp. I mean, who wouldn't be able to resist getting it on after watching this? Dummy not thick stick figures, now we talking. Perhaps not coincidentally, this was the same year where Eno announced Enemy Zero, his next game to star the character of Laura, at a Sony Expo event with the trailer that ended with a PlayStation logo morphing into a Sega Saturn logo. He even had a Sega vice president crash the stage and say, "Welcome to Sega!" How absolutely punk rock is that? Eno was giving Sony the bird for the way they treated D. It was an industry-only event, however, and because of this, no known video exists, which is a shame. While working on Enemy Zero with Sega, Eno made a deal for another game that would be the near opposite of the visual-heavy D, Real Sound Kaze no Regret, or Winds of Regret. Winds of Regret is basically an interactive audio game. I have the feeling it was created because Eno was like, you know video games? What if we did it without the video? Sega agreed to donate 1,000 Saturns to the blind, and in return, Eno gave them exclusive rights to the game. As you might expect, it was not hugely successful, and because of that, has never been translated into English as far as I can tell. According to Eno, this game cost more to produce and develop than Enemy Zero, but again, he did make the manufacturing more expensive by shipping herb seeds and a braille insert with copies of the Saturn version. And that's just beautiful. Not a lot of developers were thinking about video game accessibility in the mid-90s. There's not much I can tell you about the game itself, however, Eno was able to get Earthbound composer Keiichi Suzuki to write the music. Speaking of music, I mentioned earlier that Eno got Michael Nyman, a composer who's written music for films like The Piano, Gattaca, and Man on Wire, to write the music for Enemy Zero by cornering him in a hotel room when he came to visit Japan. But my favorite part of the story is that Eno turned down the first thing Nyman wrote him. Turns out this is what convinced Nyman to actually take the project seriously, and it resulted in a tense, emotional score that elevated an already ambitious and unique horror game that may as well be an unofficial Alien game, one of its standout accomplishments. Up to this point, Warp had been able to put out multiple games a year, but then D2 happened. D2 was initially supposed to be a direct sequel to D, starring Laura's son. However, it was intended for the M2, the follow-up to the 3DO, and that didn't work out for anyone. The M2 was cancelled shortly before its scheduled release, leaving the 50% completed version of D2 out in the cold. Eno eventually scrapped this version of D2, which was intended to be a real-time 3D action game with swords. Thankfully, he had a long-standing relationship with Sega, and D2 development would restart on the Sega Dreamcast. In fact, there are unconfirmed claims that Eno created the system's spiral logo, but something happened to him during production. Later, he would say he was feeling mentally unstable again, but it's unclear exactly what this means. My 2 cents, I'd say he was understandably stressed from the cancellation of the M2 and the money his company would have to lose from rebuilding the game for a new system. Eno even contributed to Sega Rally 2 as a musician during this time, likely as a way to make some quick cash for Warp while they worked on D2. D2 was finally released in 1999-2000 in North America. While completely different from the original version, it was still very much an action game with guns instead of swords, and a lot of story. Too much story. And lots of symbolism and other stuff, and honestly, like, the whole thing is a bit of a mess. Though for my money, it's the kind of mess that only a genius like Eno could make, which I'll admit is itself still a recommendation. Despite the name D2, it is the third game featuring a character named Laura and has no meaningful connection to Enemy Zero or the first D. After D2 came out and sold worse than expected, being a Dreamcast exclusive couldn't have helped, Kenji Eno briefly changed the name of his company from Warp to Super Warp and then disbanded that and created an entirely new company from Yellow to Orange, or FYTO. The lineage of all this is not super clear, but after D2 flopped, Eno left the games industry once again. Super Warp / FYTO would instead focus on communication, marketing, and design. They helped market this candy, for example. They also did other things like design a way to buy sodas from a vending machine with your cell phone, like Apple Pay, but way before the iPhone. The first few years at FYTO were tough. Eno toyed with returning to games, but wanted to prove to himself that he could succeed outside of that industry, and he did. He also kept himself relevant to his Japanese fans through blogging and radio shows. But from his global gaming fans' perspective, he just vanished. It's not clear to me exactly when Kenji Eno decided to return to game development. He didn't start doing interviews with American Games Press until about 2009 when his WiiWare game, You, Me, and the Cubes, came out. Unsurprisingly, Eno was fascinated with the possibilities of the Wii. He even made a model of the Wiimote out of paper just so he could play with it more. You, Me, and the Cubes is perhaps one of my favorite games made by Eno. It is a motion-controlled, physics-based puzzle game where you spawn people on an ever-expanding and rotating cube floating above a dark, ominous void. It's cute, dark, funny, feels poetic, maybe has a penis joke in it. Also, the gameplay itself works really well with motion controls. What's most interesting to me are the wholesome undercurrents of the game. Sure, your Phalos characters are trapped, teetering on the edge of a cold abyss from birth, yearning for a freedom that only you can give them by being a good physics-understanding god. But the prevailing theme of teamwork and an incredible localization really make it stand out from the rest of Eno's work. FYTO also released some mobile games during this time, but these games are no longer playable on the iOS due to the iOS 11 massacre. I played them before iOS 11, and they were cool and unusual, about what you'd expect from a Kenji Eno game. Eno's celebrity never really returned to the West, and for many, this would be the last time they heard of the man until his passing on February 20th, 2013 at the age of 42. He apparently had one more game he wanted to make, Kakezun. It was successfully crowdfunded and his colleagues planned on finishing it, but there hasn't been any news on it since 2015. For this video, we framed Eno's life through the lens of video games, specifically his horror games, but from my research, I found that he did so much more. He was in a band, he did some sort of radio show, he wrote books, including an autobiography that I have over here. I put it on the bottom. Hold on. Oh my god. Oh. And the flowers are still standing. Yeah, this autobiography is called Super 27 Years Life. I would love it to get translated. And another book written for his son after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011 about how to talk to your kids about nuclear power. He donated all proceeds to charity. It was through looking at this book, trying to glean any info about it from Auto-Japanese to English translated pages, that I stumbled upon this Amazon review. Electricity can be said to be his business tool. And really, that's perfect. The best description I found of Kenji Eno is the result of a machine struggling to understand us in a way that we can in turn understand each other. We framed Eno's life through video games, but his legacy, the electricity he put out into the world, stretches far beyond. From his blog, to radio, to his band, to paving the way for other Japanese independent developers. He put more creativity into this world than most can even really comprehend. A true legend, if ever there was one. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, and check us out, twitch.tv/StopSkeletonsFromFighting. We're back Wednesdays for Punching Weight Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And also, on a personal note, coming back to this topic kind of meant a lot to me. The Enemy Zero and D2 videos especially. I reviewed them back in 2010, and that was right after I quit my job and decided to really start doing YouTube kind of full-time, seriously. And I made those videos like right after doing that. And, you know, for the music that we used in the D2 review, that was actually all music that I had written with a friend. And reading about Kenji Eno again is really inspiring. And then realizing that the videos that I made about him were kind of when I was trying to strike it out on my own, and I was making my own music, and I was doing this video thing, and it feels like something that I would like to think that he would not be proud of, but he'd be like, yeah, good for him, you know? I feel like maybe Kenji Eno would be like, yeah, that guy's alright. Which is enough for me. And by the way, this actually used to be a Patreon exclusive video, and so for 2 years, this was a Patreon exclusive video. We polished it up and put it out here for everybody else, but like, hey man, everybody here, you're watching now, they got to watch this video for 2 years. You were missing out. Stop missing out and get on Stop Skeletons from Fighting on Patreon. Or hey, just like tell a friend, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Twitch, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, just hit the bell, keep hanging out, keep sharing videos, keep liking, keep commenting. Oh, and the new t-shirts. The new t-shirts are here. These are brand new Stop Skeletons from Fighting t-shirts from Pixel Empire. Please check them out. They're on sale.
They're
now.
Not on sale, but you can buy them.
They're for sale. Yeah, they're not. Oh yeah, they are for sale. They are just now on sale. You can now purchase them. You could not purchase them right before I finish the sentence, but upon finishing the sentence, you can now purchase them.
Alright, that's good enough.
Yeah, alright. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye. Bye.